With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Hey. A big part of today's daf is going to be speaking about whether all of the steps that are mentioned Benegeya the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim. And the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim, amazingly, are one of those parts of the Torah that are recorded twice. We have regarding the building of the Mishkan, everyone is familiar with that, the kasha that you have the Torah speaking about God's commandment to Moshe, which is Parshas Truma, Parshas Tetzava, some of Kisisa. And then again, the Torah records not the command of God, but the action, the doing of the Jewish people. We're going to use the words here of the Rishonim. There is the Parsha of Tzava'ah and the Parsha of Asiyah. So people are familiar with that. Why all that repetition? Here we're going to have something very similar. That in Parshas Tetzava, so Truma is about making mainly the Kalim, the Mishkan and the Kalim, mainly. Tetzava begins with God's commanding of the Big Day Kahuna. But that's only part of Tetzava. A big part of Parshas Tetzava is Hashem commanding to Moshe Rabbeinu that which needs to be done during the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim. Then all of that is repeated in Parshas Tzav and in the beginning of Shemini. The Ikar in Parshas Tzav. So there is the commandment to Moshe as what needs to be done during the 7 days of inauguration prior to the opening up of the Mishkan. And then there is the Parsha of the Asiyah of, we record that which Moshe Rabbeinu did. Mamish. Now, are any steps that are recorded there steps that are not essential? This is going to be a big part of today's daf. And yet there'll be a point somewhere in the Gemara and Daf Yom and Beis, the Gemara is going to ask, "My dahava hava." And like we mentioned, it's not my dahava hava, because it's not about only knowing what happened, but the miluyim that was done when we inaugurated the Mishkan repeated itself when by Shlomo HaMelech, repeated itself in the Bayis Sheni, and will repeat itself by the building of the third Beis HaMikdash, by the inauguration of the third Beis HaMikdash. So that's going to lead us into so many beautiful details, not only about the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim, but about the concept of whether a step is essential or whether it's not essential, which is a very important topic in Kachim. And we did mention in the intro to last daf, a rule that we will not have here in Yoma, that there's a Gavaldike Klal that is unique to Kachim. Normally, the Torah never repeats anything, even though to us it looks like many things are repeated. Every time God repeats something, there's a reason for it. By Kachim only, there's a rule that Hashem repeats a step, Hashem repeats a mitzvah to tell you that it's essential, implying that if there is a certain step of any avodah by Kachim that's not repeated, then lav dafke it's essential. Shana ba hakasav la'akev. But that's not the only way that Hashem tells us that something is essential. There are certain key words, code words, like the words kacha, like the words limishmeres, as we'll see, and other words that we'll see in today's daf, that if such a word is written, it means that it's essential. And we are going to begin today's daf learning about a machloekes Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina, machloekes Amoraim, regarding a few steps that happen during the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim, whether they are essential or not. It's going to be fascinating, and that's also going to lead us on Daf Yom Beis into a stira mamish, as we mentioned. There is the way the Maluyim are recorded in God's Tzava'ah, Parshas Tetzava. There's the way the Maluyim is recorded in Parshas Tzav, the Asiyah. Then they don't always match. It's not only that there's a detail here not mentioned there. When it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu's dressing the Kohen, Aaron and then his 4 sons. This is during the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim. Aaron then had 4 living sons. So Moshe Rabbeinu dressed them every day in the Big Day Kahuna. The question is, what was the Seder? Now, always Aaron was dressed before his sons. The question is that a beged was put on Aaron, that beged was then put on the sons, or all of the begadim were put on Aaron, and only then did he put on the begadim on his sons? And as we will define that machloikis, we're going to narrow it down, that the question will only be regarding the belt. Did Moshe Rabbeinu maybe dress Aaron, all of the begadim other than the avneit? Then he dressed the sons. And then when it came to putting on the belt, even the belt was put on Aaron before the sons, but there was no other beged put on Aaron after the belt prior to putting on the belt on the sons. So the Moshe's dressing of the Kohanim with the belts, with the gartel, was done all together, or not? Or not? That first Aaron was dressed fully with the belt, and until Moshe Rabbeinu came to put on the belt on the sons, many other garments were put on the sons prior to putting on the avneit, and we'll speak perhaps about the significance of that and much, much more. We left off noch on Daf Dalid Amid Beis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6 or 7 lines from the bottom of the Amid. Michlal. Now, normally when the Gemara says Michlal, right, it implies we are going back to something that was just mentioned. Here it's a little bit of an anomaly. Here this Mechlal is not going to about anything that we learned Mechlal on Daf Dalet. Not only not on Daf Dalet Amud Beis, it doesn't even refer to Daf Dalet Amud Aleph, which is why we need to have our teacher, the teacher Rashi, that says that this Mechlal, Rashi 6 lines from the bottom, now we're jumping back to Gimel Amud Beis. What did we have on Daf Gimel Amud Beis? That when a Shlakish was challenging Rabbi Yechanan's limud of the Perisha. Rabbi Yechanan is the one, like we had also from Abraisa, that learns it from the Shiva Semei HaMaluyim. So Rabbi Shlakish asked the kasha to Rabbi Yechanan that, you know what, the Gemara did not even record the answer. We spoke out the Tosfos Yeshanim. So Rabbi Yechanan tells Rabbi Shlakish that if you learned it from the Shiva Semei HaMaluyim, so then, since during the Shiva Semei HaMaluyim, everything that was done was essential. So all of the steps during the Shiva Semei HaMaluyim should be essential as well, and they're not, like we already mentioned. Even the Prisha itself, Prisha happened during Shiva Semei HaMaluyim. The Torah says Aaron and the sons were in the oil moed, they never left. Pesach oil moed loy seitzu. However, when it comes to the din of Perisha of a Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur, we already had this twice. It was not essential. You know what the proof is? The proof is that the backup Kohen Gadol did not do Perisha. Now, normally we never needed him. The Mishnah began that Mafrish and the Kohen Gadol were Mesakein a backup Kohen Gadol. But the backup Kohen Gadol did not do Perisha, which means that if Take, the backup Kohen Gadol, was the one that did the Avodah on Yom Kippur, let's say the Kohen Gadol became Tamei, V'chulei, so then the din was you had a Kohen Gadol doing the Avodah without Perisha, which means the Perisha 7 days before Yom Kippur is not essential. So Rabbi Shlakish tells Rabbi Yechanan, if you learned it from the Maluyim, by the Maluyim it was essential. So it should have been essential as well. Now Rabbi Yechanan did not answer. Rabbi Yechanan went on the offensive. Tosfos Yeshanim says it must be that Rabbi Yechanan holds that just because something is learned from a teacher, it doesn't mean it has to be exactly like the teacher. But hold on. Mechlal. Now, if Rabbi Yechanan would have held that the Perisha of Aaron during the Shiva Semei HaMaluyim itself is not essential, then he would have told Reish Lakish, I disagree with the premise of your question. He never said that. That's the Mechlal. Let's start. Nachal, Dalad Amud Beis, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid, the middle of the line. Mechlal, the fact that Rabbi Yechanan didn't challenge the premise of Reish Lakish's kasha means that they both hold, not only Reish Lakish, even Rabbi Yechanan, that by the Meloyim, kol hakosav v'hem ha'akev, including including the din that we're learning about in the Masechta of sequestration and quarantining that happened with Aaron HaKoyin and his children during the Shiva Semei HaMaluyim. And that's a chiddush. Why is that a chiddush? Because, like we mentioned in the intro, there is a machlokes between Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Chanina whether all of the steps during the Yemei HaMaluyim are essential or not. The Itmer, as we learned, Miluyim regarding the Miluyim, Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Chanina. Chadomar kol hakosav ma'akev b'hem, and they're going to have a proof for that. Because by kachim we don't say automatically just because it's written it's ma'akev. It can be lemitzvah. But the other one says no, not everything. However, only davar hama'akev l'doiros, if we find later during the b'chlal davoid of kachim that there are steps that b'chlal l'doiros it's ma'akev, which is a simin that it's that important, it's that essential. So that's megale that during the Shiva Semei HaMaluyim also ma'akev b'hem. But something she'ein ma'akev l'doiros, then ein ma'akev b'hem. And by the way, this includes our topic. In other words, L'doiros, as we know from our Mishnah, the Kohen Gadol's Perisha Shivas Yomim Kodim Yom Kippur is not Ma'akiv. And Enechanami, this Amaida will hold that they were given a mitzvah not to leave the oil moed. But if they left, okay, so they missed the mitzvah, but it didn't ruin everything. Now, when we had this Itmar, which is quoting a Machlekes Amoirayim, we, for a while, did not know which Amoira said what. But now, that's the Machlal. Now that we learned on Daf Gimel Amud Beis, now we know what Rabbi Yechanan holds, so we know what Rabbi Chanina holds. Now we know the author of it, Shita. So to Stayim, now I can bring a Raya, that Rabbi Yechanan is the one that says, Kol HaKosav Ma'akev Bahem. Like we mentioned, even though Rabbi Yechanan didn't say it, but Reish Lakish challenged Rabbi Yechanan based on this premise. And Rabbi Yechanan didn't respond. Is a raya that Rabbi Yechanan holds that it's ma'akev, which is also a raya now that Rabbi Chanina is the one that holds that even during the Shiva Samei Hamaluyim, not everything was ma'akev. And now the Gemara wants to know, my benayu. Yeah, my benayu means, okay, tell me what part of the avodah during Shiva Samei Hamaluyim are they debating about? What is their machlokes? And it's not regarding everything. Now, learning Gemara with Tosfos is always better, and throughout the sugya, I'll mention just one point that we'll have in the beginning of Tosfos. Tosfos is going to point out, the Gemara is going to give us, guys, 4 nafkaminas, 4 steps that happened during the Shiva Samei Hamaluyim that they are debating whether, if it would not have happened, whether it would be ma'akev, whether it would invalidate the whole Shiva Samei Hamaluyim. And the Gemara is giving 4 steps, dafka, because again, like Tosfos points out, there were other steps that even though l'doiros, let's put aside l'doiros, everyone will be of the same opinion. Amar Rabbi Yosef, number 1, smicha. Smicha means that before an animal is brought, in many cases, the owner, or if they are communal korbanos, the kohen representing all of the owners, the yidden, they have to lean with both of their hands on top of the animal. Smicha ika benayu. Says the Gemara, Laman the Amar, which is Rabbi Yechanan, Kol HaKosav Ma'akev Bahem. Then during the Shiva Samei Hamaluyim, unlike L'doiros, smicha is only a mitzvah. Smicha is not ma'akev, but during the Shiva Samei Hamaluyim, smicha was ma'akev. But Laman the Amr, which is we know Rabbi Chanina, that davar she'ei ma'akev l'doiros ei ma'akev bahem. Then even during the Shiva Samei Hamaluyim, smicha is not ma'akev. And before we go on, just to begin with the first thing that Tosfos points out, top Tosfos, smicha ika benayu, says Tosfos Teimali. Why didn't the Gemara mention also shirayim? Whether pouring the shirayim of the blood on the yesod of the mizbeach, whether it's ma'akev or not. And what Tosfos points out is that the yesh loymar, I'm just scooting down a couple of lines, the lokula alma shirayim loyma akve behu. Means even Rabbi Chanina, even Rabbi Yechanan that holds that things that l'doiros are not ma'akev, were ma'akev during Shiva Samei Hamaluyim. It doesn't mean everything. And Tosfos doesn't only speak about Shanayim, but look, he speaks about other steps of the Avodah. In other words, what we are learning on Daf Heyam and Aleph is Dafka. There are 4 steps in which there is a machlokes. In the other steps, there is no machlokes. Now, says the Gemara, right 4 lines from the top, L'doiros minolan deloy ma'akve, the Tanya. It says in Parshas Vayikra, this is Bechlal when the Torah introduces the concept of smicha. The pasuk reads, "V'samach yodoi al roish ha'oila v'nirtzaloi lechaper olav." That's the pasuk. In the same verse, we have juxtaposed almost back to back, but yes, in the same verse, the words "v'samach" and the words "v'nirtza." V'nirtza means that this will bring about atonement. So the question is, smicha brings about atonement? It's not true. When we know that, what step is that which is the makaba patish in the kapara. And how do we know that? Because it says ki adam hu banefesh yechaper. So ma Talmud lo mevesamach v'nirtza answers the Gemara. Or actually answers the Braisa, she'im asal l'smicha sheyarei mitzvah, that if a kohen will consider smicha only like a shirayim of a mitzvah, meaning he's not going to consider it an actual mitzvah, meaning he won't do it. So you should know, male olav hakosav ki ilu loy kiper. It will be as if there was no atonement. even though de facto, yes, v'chiper. How great is Torah Shebal Peh? Just to appreciate this Braisa. It's the opposite, das balabatim, hepach das Torah. You would say, v'samach v'nirtza. Only v'samach, only v'nirtza. It's mamish the opposite. It's as if, when you do smicha, then you get the kapara. Even though there are steps in kachim that are not essential, what Hashem is trying to communicate, don't say, if it's not essential, then why should we do it? No, punkt fakert. God is saying that if you won't do what is taka not essential, if you won't do it, it will be as if I won't accept it. There's going to be a lack in the venirza, even though de facto you'll get the vikapara. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, nafkemino number 2, the waving. For example, when a person brings a shlamim, so the chazay and the shoik are given to the kohen. Before you give the chazay and the shoik to the kohen, right, we have this Chumash Rashi, so they would take all of the emurim, and they would place on it the chazay and the shoik. And the balabos and the kohen together would wave them. The avoid of waving. Now, if waving was not done, l'doirais, the waving is not ma'akiv. So the question is, was the avoida of waving during the Shiva Samei Amulim, whether that's ma'akiv? Rabbi Yechanan says yes, Rabbi Chanina says no. Ike benayu. Amanda Amar Kol HaKos Ma'akiv Vahem. Rabbi Yechanan, the ma'akva, that was unique for the Shiva Samei Amulim. Ulamanda Amar Davar Shei Ma'akiv L'Doiris Ei Ma'akiv Vahem. Then Loi Ma'akva. And L'Doiris Minolan, that waving is not ma'akiv, as it says in a Braisa. We're quoting here a pasuk in Parshas Mitzayra. The pasuk says that v'im aim yodei maseges, right? If the mitzvah cannot afford to bring the more expensive karbanos, so it says v'lokach keves echad asham. It's even though the dal of the mitzvah can replace 2 of the animal karbanos for 2 birds. But there is one carbon that always has to be a animal carbon by the mitzvah, which is the asham. Remember that? Because they also need to take the blood of the asham and they put it on his ear, right? And they put it on his right thumb and on the right big toe. And the Torah writes, letenufa lechaper. These 2 words are mamish written one after the other. So here again, asks the Braisa about the chi tenufa mechaperes when we know v'haloi ein kapara ela badam. Shenemer, as it says again, quoting the pasuk vayikra yud zayin ki adamu banefesh yichaper. So therefore, ma tamud leim letenufa lechaper. Same logic. It means the opposite of what it appears. She'im asol letenufa sheyarei mitzvah. Because the din is that you don't need to do it; it's not essential. So if a kohen will treat it with lesser chashivas, meaning he will not do it, so there's a consequence. You want to get the full kapara l'tnufa l'chaper. You skip the l'tnufa, it's a higher madrega of kapara. You will not get, even though on the basic level, yes, v'chiper. Rav Papa Amar, the 3rd nafkamina. Perisha shiva iker benayu, the topic that we're speaking about. Lamando Amar kol hakasav ma'akev bahen, then ma'akva. Because it's written over there. That's Rabbi Chanina. And again, like we mentioned from the Mishnah, it's clear the fact that the backup kohen gadol was not sequestered means it's not ma'akev. So since ledoiros it's not ma'akev, so Rabbi Chanina will therefore hold that it's also not ma'akev by the Shivas Yemei Ha-Miluyim. Because since it says in our Mishnah Mida Katani that maskinen, that the predia backup kohen gadol was only prepared, we designated a backup kohen gadol, but it doesn't say regarding this kohen gadol that he also has to be mafrishin, because they didn't do mafrishin. And what happens if he was the one that ended up doing the avodah? He did the avodah without doing prisha. Is the charaya that l'doiros prisha is not ma'akev? Is the charai that Prisha is not ma'akev? Ravina Omar, I think, Danny asked in the last year, what's the nafkamina between Rabbi Yechanan and Rish Lakish? Could be this is somehow connected. In other words, if the whole source of Perisha is not coming from the Meluyim, could be it affects it somehow. I have to develop that, and maybe I'll share this in next class. Ravina says this is the 4th and final nafkamina to the exclusion of all the others that Tosfos speaks about. And now we're going to learn another Gavaldik Edin. This is Gavaldik. that ribui shiva umeshicha shiva. What does this mean? It means that during the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim, all of the 7 days, we're not going to focus here on the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was the one that dressed Aaron. That we're going to leave for Amid Beis. But Aaron needed to put on, for all of the 7 days, his begadim. And like Rashi points out, not because he did the avodah, he did not. Moshe Rabbeinu did the avodah during the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim. But Aaron HaKohen every day put on the begadim, took off the begadim. Why is that so important? Because you know what? When a new Kohen Gadol is appointed, that's going to be the end of the Amud over here, even though what we're going to say now is not Ma'akev. Even if he only put on the Shmoyne Begadim once, he's with that already invested with the Kedusha of the Kohen Gadol, but that's not ideal. You know what is ideal? And especially when we still had the Shemen HaMishcha, as we learned in Shkolim, that the Shemen HaMishcha was put on a Kohen Gadol, that for 7 days, every time there was a new Kohen Gadol, there was this concept of him dressing with the begadim and him being anointed. They put the anointment on the head, and then between the eyebrows, we'll learn about the special way they were moishechim. That should happen 7 days. So what happens if during the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim you didn't put the Ribi Shiva? You didn't have the Meshicha Shiva. Ikibenayu. Now the Torah says it has to happen. So Laman the Amr, which is Rabbi Yechanan Kolakos Ma'akav Behem. So if it would not have happened, then Aaron HaKohen would not be imbued with the Kedusha of the Kohen Gadol. However, Laman the Amr Dov Shem Ma'akav L'Doyre Shem Ma'akav Behem. That means again, L'Doyros, it's ideal for a new Kohen Gadol to have 7 days of him putting on the garments, taking off the garments, 7 days him being anointed. Now we know that the Shemen HaMishcha was hidden by King Yoshio. So B'chlal during Zman Ba'isheni we didn't have it. And I will learn that B'di'evet, one of the two is enough to imbue the Kohen Gadol with his new level of Kahuna Gedolah. And a Chanami. And not only that, one of the two, it doesn't have to be 7 days, it can be 1 day. But L'chatchila it's 7-7. Oh, the Tanya, the Chiper HaKohen. This is written in the Avodah of Yom Kippur. Asher yimshach oisoi v'asher yimalei es yodoi l'chayin tachas aviv. It's good to know, what does yimalei yodoi mean? Yimalei yodoi means to put on the shmoyne begadim. That's the expression in the Torah. So it says yimshach and yimalei yodoi. Ma Talmud loymar. Ma Talmud loymer zok Rashi. What's the kasha? Im lalame that the avodah of Yom Kippur has to be done only with the Kohen Gadol. We don't need to have this pasuk because says Rashi v'aloi kol aparsha bi Aaron nemra, as it says b'zois shavei Aaron v'nosan Aaron v'hikrev Aaron uba Aaron. Why does the Torah emphasize Aaron to tell you that every Yom Kippur in the future the avodah can only be done with the Kohen Gadol? So why does the Torah have to speak about the Meshicha that's done to the Kohen Gadol, the donning, or the dawning, however you pronounce it, of the Shmoyne Begadim? Oh, says the Beraisa, because Lafi Shenemar. And now we're going to a pasuk in Parshas Tetzaveh. Like we mentioned in the introduction, just to have clarity. The Torah records twice that which happened in Shiva Simei Hamaluyim. Some in the portion of Tetzaveh, which we will also use as a code in the parsha of God's commandment, of the Tzava'ah. The other time it's recorded in the parsha of Tzav, which is the parsha of Asiyah. So now we're quoting a pasuk in Tetzaveh. Shivas yomim yolbasham akoyen tachtov mi banov. That which was done during the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim should not only be then, should be forever. So yolbasham. That means you have to dress the new Kohen Gadol as Aaron was. Aaron was dressed not only 1 day. During the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim, every day he was dressed. So Ein Liyala Nisraba Shiva, V'nimshach Shiva, that it will be effective, even though the pasuk doesn't write explicitly Meshicha here, but we'll get to that in a moment. Asks the Beraisa, how do you know that L'doiros, it doesn't have to be that way? If it was only Nisraba Shiva, if only there were 7 days in which every day he put on the big day Kahuna Gedolah, independent of whether he did the Avodah or not, just dressing with the Begadim itself, ideally 7 days. What happens if the Meshicha was only done 1 day? Or Punkt Fakert, what happens if he only put on the Shmoyne Begadim 1 day, even though he was Nimshach Shiva? Many Rishonim have another line in the Beraisa. Or how do you know, and whether it's written in the Beraisa or not, this statement is L'kula Alma. What happens if L'doiros, it's only Nisraba Yom Echad, or only Nimshach Yom Echad? How do you know that this minimum step is enough to imbue him with the kedusha of the kahuna gedola minayin? So that's tamalemer amshe yimshach oisoi v'ashi yimale es yodoi. That which is, like Rashi says, this line, this pasuk is completely superfluous. And here we're speaking about Lashon Yachid, that he was anointed, any amount. And Yemala Yodi means Ribu Begadim. Doesn't mean filling the hands. It means him getting dressed with the Shemaine Begadim. That is to tell you Mikol Mak. Says the Gemara, Ashkechen Ribu Shivoin Lechatchila. Hold on. How do you Bechlal know that in the future, every time you upgrade a kohen to become a kohen gadol, ideally he should be dressed for 7 days in a row with the big day kohuna gedola? Now, guys, again, if he's going to be doing the avoid, of course he's going to get dressed. But what happens if the kohen gadol, when he's anointed, when he's appointed as a kohen gadol, won't be doing any avoida? Still, lachatchila put on big day kohuna gedola on him 7 days in a row. Now, that is clear from the pasuk that we quoted in Tetzava, where it says, Shivas Yomim Yilbasham HaKoyen Tachtov Mibanov. Shivas Yomim Yilbasham. Again, it's not Ma'akev, but it's Lachatchila. But that pasuk only spoke about Milu Yadav. But Meshicha Shiva Lechatchila Minolan. Again, by the Meloim, it's written so explicitly. The question is, L'doirois, even though it's not Ma'akev, how do you know that it's even a Lachatchila? Maybe just anoint him once. So says the Gemara, like, from the fact that we needed to have a pasuk that is extra, from which we learn that any minimum amount, Yimshach Oisai. Why did we have to have a Yimshach Oisai to tell you Mikol Makim? So the fact that we needed to make it clear that b'diavad any minimum amount is enough, that means that lachatchila you need more than a minimum amount. And what would that mean? 7 days in a row. Since the Amakra ubig de hakodesh ashal yarin yiu levanav achrav lemashcha bahem ulamale yes yadam ulamade bamas yadam. So this is taka pasuk that you have in Tetzava, but this is not in the part of the Shiva Semei Hamaluyim. This pasuk you have in the beginning of Parshas Tetzava, when the Torah is telling us how to make the big day kahuna. So we're writing that these begadim should be for the future Kahanim Gedolim, and the Torah there writes about Mashiach. So we make a hekesh between the begadim and Mashiach to tell you 3 lines from the bottom of the Amid, Iskash Mashiach Lariboy, Mariboy, as we just pointed out. It says clearly in Tetzava, Shivas Yomim Yolbasham HaKoyen Tachtom Mibanov. So af Mashiach, at least Lechatchila, Mashiach Shiva. Now comes the following question. My Tama, the Manda Omar, Kol HaKosav Behem HaAkev. Hold on, like we mentioned in the intro. By Kachim, there's a rule. Only that which is repeated twice. Not the only rule, but that's a rule that is known. Let's just speak it out. Kol Shana Bahar Kosav LaAkev. The 4 items that we spoke about, the Smicha, and the Tenufa, and the Perisha, and the Milu Yodayim, and the Meshicha, they were not repeated. And yet, we are learning that Rabbi Yechanan, like Reish Lakish, not Rabbi Chanina, but Rabbi Yechanan holds, they are ma'akiv during the Shiva Sameyu. How do you know that? There has to be a source for that. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Bisna, the last line of the Amid, that Amar Kra, it says, V'asisa li Aharon ulevanov kacha. This is a pasuk in Tetzaveh. The word kacha, do it like this. The word kacha is taka extra. Why like this? Do it so, whatever the taich in English is. Kacha means azoi, und nicht anders. Ikuvahu. Hold on, fragt die Gemara, Tanach, all is well. Kol daf heyamid beis, kol milsa deksiva bahai inyana. If that is the source, so indeed, we just quoted the pasuk in Parshas Tetzava, and now we're going to get the words of Rashi. Look inside the top Rashi. Milsa deksiva bahai inyana, which is Beparshas Tzava, the parsha that's recording not what Moshe Rabbeinu did during the Shiva Semei HaMeloim, but what Hashem told Moshe he needs to do. That's called the parsha of Tzava, the Meloim, which is the parsha of Atat Tzava. So Enechanami, the word Kacha is a pasuk from Parshas Tetzava. So everything that's written in Tetzava is essential. Let Rabbi Yechanan, because it says Kacha. But what about Milsa the Leiksiva B'Ha'inyana? Now what are we referring to? So first of all, says Rashi, look inside the second line from the top, the Leiksiv Beparshas HaMeloim, which is the parsha of Tetzava, where it says B'zeh hadavar shetasa. So what does it not say? What does it not say in Tetzava that it does say in Sav and Shemini? You know what it says? It doesn't say Sheyitein el hachoishen urim v'tumim. Now, guys, don't get confused. In the beginning of Parshas Tetzava, of course, the Torah speaks about the Chosh and the Urim v'Tumim, right? We learn Chitas. We should know that. Yeah, we know that. Don't confuse the beginning of Tetzava to what we're speaking about Tzava'ah. There's Hashem telling Moshe Rabbeinu how to make the Begadim, how to make the big Kohen Gedolah. The Torah speaks about the Choshen and the Urim v'Tumim. Yes, but in the second part of Parshas Tetzava, where God is telling Moshe what he needs to do during the Shiva Semei Hamaluyim, what's not mentioned there is anything about the Choshen and that he should place in the Choshen and the Urim v'Tumim. It's not mentioned there. However, in the Parsha of Asiyah, what's the Parsha of Asiyah? When the Torah is recording what Moshe Rabbeinu did. I'm reading weiter in Rashi. Aval beParshas Tzaves Aharon shenem rosham Asiyas Hamaluyim. Not what God told Moshe to do. When the Torah is recording what he did, there it says, Vayiten olav es hachoshen, Vayiten el hachoshen es urim es hatumim. And we already spoke out this Rashi. Let's keep on reading it. It also says, V'nasata el hachoshen hamish v'des urim es hatumim. Says Rashi, no, we're not addressing the beginning of Va'ata Tetzava. Ein zu meParshas HaMiluyim. That's only the Parshas Asiyas HaBegadim. And nothing that's mentioned there is Le'ikuva. The Kacha that we quoted on the end of Amud Aleph is what's written regarding God's Tzava'ah to Moshe, what needs to be done during the Shiva Semei HaMiluyim. So how do you know that the placing of the Urim v'Tumim in the Choshen is Ma'akam? Not just Bekitzah, we have time, it's a small Amud relatively. There's two things, according to most Rishonim. You have the Choshen itself, right, the breastplate that had on it the 12 amazing stones with all of the oisias that were engraved in it, right, the Shvatim, Shiftei Ka, etc. But we're going to go that the Urim v'Tumim were two either parchments or plates of gold that had in them either parchment written or plates of gold engraved certain Shemas HaKadoshim, the Shem Ab v'chulei. And that was placed inside a fold in the Choshen. Lahavdil, just as a mashal, like a battery in something. That the Shem Kadosh of the Eibishter that was put in there, the Urim v'Tumim, that is what made the Choshen function in a miraculous way. That when there were certain questions that were allowed to be asked of the Kohen Gadol while he was wearing the Choshen Mishpat, those letters would shine, they would protrude. At least the Oisius, and then the Kohen Gadol with Ruach HaKodesh would know what these letters are for. So, is that placement of the Urim v'Tumim in the Choshen essential? Now, let me say something very interesting. Again, we learned at the end of Shkolim certain items that we didn't have in Bezman Bayesheni. So we learned that the Aron HaKodesh was Nignaz by King Yoshio. We're going to have more in Yoma regarding something else. We had this also in Soita, right? That the Urim v'Tumim we didn't have Bezman Bayesheni. And it's not called a lack of the Shmoyne Begadim, because we did have the Choshen. We had the Choshen Mishpat. But the Urim v'Tumim was not placed there. So coming back over here, the Torah said the word Kacha only in Parshas Tzava'ah. Over there, the Torah doesn't mention the placing of the Urim v'Tumim in the Choshen. So maybe it wasn't essential, says the Gemara Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. It is essential because, as Rashi just told us, it does say in Parshas Asiyah, it does say in Parshas Tzav that Moshe Rabbeinu placed in the Choshen the Urim v'Tumim. In Parshas Tzav, the Torah uses the words Pesach. In Parshas Tetzava, the Torah uses the word Pesach. Look inside Rashi. So that creates a Gzeira Shava, which will then take the word Kacha and throw it to the Parsha of Asiyah. Rav Mashar Shir Amar, we don't need to have a Gzeira Shava, because just like we have in Tetzava a word that connotes essentiality, Kacha, there is another expression used in the Parshas Asiyah in Tzav, which is Ushmartem es Mishmeres Hashem, protect God's charge. What does it mean to protect? Protect means ikuva. What a beautiful way of understanding protecting. Protecting meaning that everything that's mentioned here is so important that if you miss it, the whole thing is not good. So protect it. Rav Ashi Yomar, another word that's used in the Parsha of Asiyah, but mainly you don't need the Gzeira Shava, and that is Tichein Tzivesi. Now Tichein Tzivesi is not written in Parshas Tzav, it's written in Parshas Shemini. It doesn't matter. Parshas Tzav and Shemini is all the record of what they did. What they did. So now we're going to go for a couple of lines, right? I know that we just recently learned this in Chitas, in Parsha Shmini, and many times Parsha Shmini is learned for more than 1 week, because when it's Chal on the week of Pesach, which is great. So now we're going to go into another detail of back and forth that happened. We'll say this first by heart, when the Mishkan Vahiba Yom HaShmini, and with the greatest joy there was this terrible calamity that Nadav and Avihu passed away. And therefore Aaron Ubanov had the status of Oinanim. They weren't even buried yet. And normally an Oinin is not allowed to partake of meat. On that day there were 3 korbanos that we're going to focus on right now. There was a mincha and a shlomim and a chatos. Now really there were various chatois, but we're going to be focusing on the chatos that's brought every Rosh Chodesh, the carbon that's brought l'doros. Moshe Rabbeinu told Aaron that God told him to tell Aaron that the carbon mincha should be eaten. Normally a oinen does not eat kachim, a side of meat, even a mincha. Hashem told Moshe to tell Aaron that the karbanos that were brought as miluyim, inauguration karbanos, are exceptions, and Aaron should eat it. And Aaron ate it. Happened to be that the chatos that is brought on Rosh Chodesh, that was brought on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which was Vayiba Yom HaShmini, that chatos Aaron HaKohen burnt. And Moshe Rabbeinu had the whole back and forth, wanted to understand why was it burnt. He said maybe the avodah was done wrong, maybe it was yotzeh, maybe it was tamei, and Aaron said no. So Moshe Rabbeinu told him that I was commanded that you should eat it. And Aaron told Moshe Rabbeinu, it was beautiful back and forth, no, that you told me about the mincha. You told me about the mincha. Mincha is kachei shah. But how can I learn from mincha for the seir chatos? That's not something unique. And the rule is I'm a oinen. And Moshe was moida. You're right. I was only told regarding the mincha, not regarding the chatos. But then Moshe Rabbeinu tells Aaron, I stand corrected by the chatos Rosh Chodesh. But the shlomim eat, because the shlomim was like the mincha, it was a unique carbon brought by the Maluyim. And that explains why you have the word kichein tzuvesi, or kasher tzivisi, or kasher tziva Hashem, why it's written 3 times in Parsha Shmini. So Tanach Rabbanan, when it says again 3 times, number 1, kichein tzuvesi, number 2, kasher tzivesi, number 3, kasher tziva Hashem. Chavre will mamish appreciate this when you look on the Chumash inside. Why 3 times? Taiches the Braisa. The first time it says kichein tzuvesi. That is Moshe Rabbeinu's telling Aaron before him doing the avodah, after he became an oinan, that God told him ba'aninus still yoicheluha. Now what was that referring to? The mincha that was unique to the Miluyim. Then when it says again in the Parsha Shmini that Moshe tells Aaron kasher tzivesi, that is after he found out that they burnt the chatos. So Moshe Rabbeinu was upset. And he says, how could you have done that? Did I not command you to eat it? That was B'shas Maisa. B'shas Maisa after he discovered that they burnt it. And then the third time where it says, kasher tziva Hashem, the loymei elai ani oimer. That is after Moshe Rabbeinu was moida to Aaron. Oh, you're right. You cannot learn kachei doiros from kachei shah. Good that you burnt the chatos, but remember, I'm only moida regarding the burning of the chatos because it is a seir shel Rosh Chodesh. But the shlamim, that nothing was done yet with the shlamim. Remember that God told me regarding the mincha, eat it. The same thing goes for the shlamim. And now let's come back to the Shavuos Hamaluyim. So aside of what we just learned on Amud Aleph, beautiful that when a kohen gadol is instituted or when he's inaugurated as a kohen gadol, lechatchila, when you have the shemen hamishcha, for 7 days in a row he should put on the beged, take off all the shemen begadim. For 7 days in a row he's going to be anointed with the shemen hamishcha. Now we're going to learn another detail which was unique to the Maluyim. Not every time a kohen gadol becomes a kohen gadol. That Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, you dress Aaron Ubanov. And the hemshech of the Gemara is mamish masuk midvash, because now that we just introduced, to have clarity that there is a repetition. Obviously, it's not a repetition, but you look inside the pshat. The Torah records what God told Moshe in Parshas Tetzaveh, in the Parsha of Tzava'ah. Then the Torah records what Moshe Rabbeinu did in the Parsha of Asiyah, which is Parshas Tzav and Shemini. One of the things that he needed to do is Moshe dressed Aaron Ubanov. So now we're going to go into details about that. In both cases, Not in tzava, not in asiyah. Michnosayim ein ksuvim b'parsha. Look inside the Rashi, 3 lines under Tosfos. When the Torah is telling God, when the Torah is recording that Hashem told Moshe, dress Aaron, it went into details. With all of the begadim other than the michnosayim, the breeches, the pants. Belavishus begadim. Loi b'tzava v'loi b'asiyah. So why is that? So it teaches Rabbi Yossi bar Rab Chanina. Let's go in the Gemara. That Kishu Omer, when it says in Parshas Tetzaveh, V'zeh vov hamachaber. V'zeh hadavar asher tasu lehem lekadosh oisim lechahen. And what is the vov connected to? What's the beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh? The beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh is the commandment of the making of the begadim. There, the Torah clearly speaks about making the mechnosayim. So the vov is to include that when Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to dress Aaron Ubanov, He also told him to dress him with the mechnosayim. And there's a reason, like Rashi is saying, so why was it not written explicitly? Because that's primarily lachasois psar erva. Unlike the other begadim, are mainly l'chavei de lucifaris. In other words, is it to cover something negative, or is it to bring out something even more positive? So it's separate. Michnosayim is not the same. And by the way, the first beged that the Kohanim wore every day was dafka the Michnosayim. It's like 1 and 3. That's the way we look at it. And now Rabbi Yossi adds another detail. That also that the asira so'efa is the chavitim that the Kohen Gadol brings every day. Asira so'efa is the chavitim that the Kohen Gadol brings as his minchas chinuch. That needed to happen during the 7 days. Even though it's not written explicitly, it happened during all the 7 days. Now the Gemara says, Bishleim mechnasayim taka. The Vav, it says, Vizeh hadover. So it links us to the beginning of Tetzaveh. It's written b'inyane de begadim, so it fits. But you don't have in the beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh anything about the Kohanim having to bring their minchas chinuch. You don't have anything about the Kohen Gadol having to bring chavit to Kohen Gadol. El asira so'efa minolan. And how is he bringing it from Vizeh? Clarifies the Gemara. Oh, that is not learned from the Vav. That is learned from the word Zeh itself. Asyo zezeh. In Parshas Tzav, it says Vizeh korban Aaron u'banav asher yakriv Hashem asira so'efa. Gevaldik. So now we go from there, zeh, that not only do they bring it when they are inaugurated, but during the Shiva Simei Hamaluim, every day they brought it. Sha'af Mikra Parsha Ma'akev. What's Mikra Parsha? Another Gavaldik detail. That Moshe Rabbeinu, when he would dress Aaron Ubanov during all of the Shiva Simei Hamaluim, would tell them all of the steps that he has to do, which is really a big part of Parshas Tetzaveh. In other words, he would read it out, he would tell them what God told him, and then he would do it. How do you know that this is essential? So Talmud loimer, vayomer Moshe el ha'eda, zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem. So davar and dibur, now we're going at drasha, afilo, the dibur is going to be ma'akev. It's fantastic. And let's go on top of the Amid that the word ikov, let's go with the first limud, comes from the words kacha. The word kacha is written in the parsha of Tzava. The word Vayom Moshe Eda is written in Parshas Tzav, in the parsha of Asiyah. But zeh, that's the zeh. In the pasuk that it says zeh hadavar, so maybe the hadavar goes to the zeh, which links us to the kacha. That's how it's ma'ak. Now, Kate Sadel Bishon. So now that we mentioned about Moshe Rabbeinu's dressing of Aaron Ubanov during all of the 7 days, Shiva Simei Hamaluyim, and as we'll point out, the question is a big question because there appears to be a contradiction. So the Gemara, before the Gemara points out the contradiction, the Gemara asks on itself that Ketzad il Bishar Maidahava Bishloima, everything else, like we mentioned, everything that happened during the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim, at least, not li'ikuva, but lemitzvah, needs to happen every time there's a new Kohen Gadol, like we mentioned. There's a new Kohen Gadol. For 7 days, he should dress the big Kahuna Gedolah. If you have the Shevan HaMishcha, for 7 days, lechatchila, anoint him with the Shevan HaMishcha. But, that Moshe has to be the one doing it, that's unique to the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim. And that's why we are just in asking, that never happened again. It did not happen, my friends, when they inaugurated the Shlomo HaMelech. if we're going to say that Shlomo HaMelech, the Nasi, was in the place of Moshe Rabbeinu, he did not dress the Kohanim for 7 days. Didn't happen. Didn't happen in the times of Ezra. So here it's Mamash Maida Hava Hava. Elo, the Gemara says no. Itaka didn't happen with Shlomo, it didn't happen with Ezra, but you know what? It's going to happen when Mashiach comes. It's going to happen la'asid lavai. Elo keitzad malbishim la'asid lavai. So the Gemara asks, why will Aaron Ubanov have to be dressed? La'asid lavai nami. If you have a question, l'chshivayu Aaron Ubanov, Moshe is going to be with them. So you'll ask Moshe. Like, if you're asking me about a futuristic event which is connected to Tchias HaMesim, so Aaron is coming back, Moshe is coming back, don't worry about that. Moshe Rabbeinu will deal with it. So the Gemara says, no. Elo, now there's an important detail over here, and that is, Rashi speaks out beautiful, that even though Aaron and Banov were already appointed and they were imbued with the Kedusha of Kohen Gedolah, with Kohanim, after their passing, from our Gemara it sounds that level of Kedusha left them. And therefore, by Tchias HaMesim, they will have to be, so to say, reappointed. So the descendants of Aaron Ubanov won't need any of that, because they are in the place of their parents. In the place of the parents, the Kahuna is in them. But there is a certain level of Kedusha that will be removed, or that was removed, simply because they passed away. And Aaron himself, Ubanov, will have to be re-inaugurated. Elamah, you have a doubt how he will do it. Moshe Rabbeinu is going to be doing it. He'll know how to do it. So here the Gemara tells us, that if you read, contrast the Parsha of Tzava'ah and the Parsha of Asiyah, there's a contradiction. And you know what? It's important to understand Chumash. So, Bepoyol Mamish L'may Nafkamina, don't worry about it. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu, here we don't say Tishbi Yitaretz. It's not the Elyahu of Moshe Rabbeinu is going to do it the way he did it in the first place. But until the return of Moshe Rabbeinu, open up a Chumash and explain to me what happened. What's the contradiction? So really, it's not only a contradiction, but the resolution of the contradiction is a machlokes. So the Gemara begins with a machlokes Amoraim that Pligibah b'nei Rabchia. Who remembers who's b'nei Rabchia? Yehud and Chizkiah, right? They argue with Rabbi Yechanan. That's it. Chad Amar, one side says that Aaron v'charkach banov, v'chad Amar Aaron banov bebas achas. Oh, so we spoke this out in the introduction. So let's read inside the Rashi here. We have time. Rashi's 8 lines before the bottom of the Amid. The ches of the Bach is in Rashi. It's easy to find in the middle of the line, all the way in the bottom. Lemizbar Kroi. We have to explain psukim in a way. They should not contradict each other. What's the contradiction? Because dibit tzava'ah means parshas ata tetzaveh. What does it say? V'chagarta oisam avneit Aaron ubanov. Together, mashma that chagirasam shall av ubanim b'seider echad. Meaning, v'loi hifsik levishas begad acher bentayim. As we'll read this in the Gemara. No doubt, you can't dress 2 people at the same time. Aaron was always dressed prior to his 4 sons, then during the Shiur Semei HaMaluim. Not only that, it wasn't beged per beged. Aaron was fully dressed. Question is, fully dressed to the exclusion of 1 beged, the avneit, or taka fully dressed. When it says in the parsha of Tzava'ah that v'chagarta oisam, in the plural, all of them together, avneit. All of them, not only all the 4 sons, the father and the 4 sons, Aaron Ubanov, is mashma, that the avneit was done all together, which would have meant that all the begadim was put on Aaron, aside of the avneit. Then Moshe Rabbeinu dressed the Banov, the 4 sons, Nadav and Avihu, Elazar and Isamar, with their shloisha begadim. Now the only beged missing by everyone is the gartel. Of course, Aaron will always come first. Moshe Rabbeinu put the avneit on Aaron, and then he put the gartel on Banav. That means together. Together means that loy hifsik levishas beged acher bentayim. So is mashma from the parsha of Tetzava. However, we're continuing in Rashi. 7 lines by the bottom of the Amid, but Uba Asiyah, when the Torah is recording what Moshe Rabbeinu actually did in the portion of Tzav, Vayikra Perek Ches, it says clearly it was separated. Vayachagor oisoi avneit. And then many psukim later it says the banov. So that's the stira that the Gemara is asking, Ketzad Hil Bishon. And even though what taka happened, we'll see when Moshe Rabbeinu is going to do the same thing again to Aaron Abanov in the imminent Tchias HaMesim by the building of the third Beis HaMikdash. And we know clearly that the tzaddikim are getting up right away in the beginning. Actually, Chazal tells us that they're gonna get up noch right before the coming of Mashiach. Mashiach will enter with 8 princes. But let's go back. But we want to know how to learn Chumash. Which one is Dafka and which one is coming to teach you a certain unique halacha. So back in the Gemara. So Amar Abaye like this. B'ketoines u'b'mitznefes, tunic and turban. And again, Rashi holds, that's just an example. Rashi we just read. All of the begadim beside of the belt. Kula amaloi pligi. That first Aaron was donned by Moshe. All of the begadim. Maybe other than the belt. And only then did Moshe Rabbeinu begin to dress banav. Why do we know that for sure? So that's clear, because the Bein B'Tzava'a, which is the key, which is the code for Parshas Tetzava, Bein Ba'asiyah, which is the code here for Parshas Tzav. Aaron is written Kadim and separate. Kadim doesn't only mean mentioned first in the same verse, but Aaron was dressed and then Banav. However, Ki Pligi, where do we find the stira, Dafka, when it comes to the dressing of, putting on of the belt, Ba'avnei, Gartel, Mando Amar Aaron V'charkach Banav. Why would it be separate? Where do we find them being separated in Parshas Asiyah? As it says in Parshas Tzav, Vayikra Ches, Pasuk Zayin, Vayachagor Oisoi. The Oisoi is him, singular, Aaron HaKohen, Ba'avneit. And in many psukim later, in Pasuk Yud Gimel, it says, Vayachagor Oisam Avneit. Oman do Amar Avaroin Uvanov was bebas achas, because they are going to make the Iker. They are going to make the Iker, the Chsiv v'chagarta oisam, that Aaron Ubanov, the next words, v'chagarta oisam Aaron Ubanov. That's the pasuk by Tzava. That's the pasuk in Ata Tetzava. And what do you have? You have a machlokes tanaim. Bnei Rab Chia on one side, we don't know which one said what, but one of them said one, and one of them said the opposite. Now, each one has to explain the stira. No, it's one is dafke. But there's a reason why the other pasuk is written the opposite way. So Olaman the Amar Aaron Abanu Babas Achas, that the pasuk in Tzava is the Iker. I in Tzav, I in Asiyah, it says first Vayachagor Oisoi, pasuk Zayin, and Ba'avnit, and then it says a few pasukim later, clear, separated. V'hadik say Vayachagor Oisam Avneit, implying that it was not at the same time. Dav Vav. So he'll answer Amar Loch. That's a whole different din. The Torah separated them to teach you whether the belt of the Kohen Gadol was fundamentally different than the belt of Kohanim that are not Kohanim Gedolim. And we're speaking about, let's say this by heart, the Avneit of the Kohen Gadol, the belt of the Kohen Gadol was mamish, what we call shatnes. The Torah writes that explicitly. That's written in the beginning of Parshas Tetzava, when God told Moshe how to make the big day Kohuna Gedoyla. The Torah speaks about sheish mashazar, twisted threads of linen. Sheish means linen. And also we had threads made out of tchelas. Now tchelas refers to the dye, but we have a klal, not only by the Mishkan and by big day Kohuna, we even have this by tzitzis. Tchelas is only called tchelas if the dye from the chilazim is put on wool fibers. Tcheles means amra. And the Torah writes clearly that the belt of the Kohen Gadol was both sheish mashzar and techeles and argaman, but we're just focusing on shatnes. That's clear. Question is whether the avneit of a Kohen Stam was also shatnes, or like all of the other begadim of a Kohen Stam, it was all linen. So maybe the avneit was also all linen. Many nafkeminas to that, but we're going to learn about that later here in the Masechta. So that's the machlokes over here. We're going to have this on Daf Yud Beis. So Amalach, that's the source of that machlokes. That's the scriptural source of this machlokes. Was the Torah separated the two donning of the garments? Vayachagor oisoi, vayachagor oisam. Parshas Asita, it's not the same. It's different type of belt, but they were both dressed. They were all dressed with the avneit together. Even though the avneit was different, There's something unique about the belt. However, let's see what Kevin is putting up on the picture. Laman, very good. Laman, the Amar Aaron, Acharkach v'Acharkach Banov. What does he do with the pasuk? V'chagarto oisam avneid all together. So fakert, he tells you all together is to tell you that it is the same. Amalacha hu kamash malan that avneita shekan gadol zehu avneita shel kohen hedyet. So now we will have a gewaldige base to the machloikas, and really this is a machloikas tanoim, as we'll have, God willing, soon on Daf Yud Beis. Now, therefore, finishing teaching the psukim, vayachagor oisam avneit, and then vayachagor oisam lamali shmamino, that de facto aroin b'chakach banov. The Gemara just wants to clarify. The one that says that they were dressed together, we already read that Rashi. It doesn't mean that mamish together. So you can't dress 5 people at the same time without a mess. No, it means loitzricha da'agdim, like we mentioned. The question is like this: Aaron was for sure first, no doubt. So option number 1 is Moshe Rabbeinu dressed Aaron every day from the 7 days. All of the big day Kohuna Gedola other than the Avnei, that he left. Then he dressed the 4 sons with the 3 begadim. The only beggar that each one of these groups, the Kohen Gadol and the Kahanim, need is the Avneit, and now he put it on together. Together means the Agdim. Aaron came always first, but there was no other beggar being mafsek between the Gartel and the Gartel. Masha'enkein, the other Shita holds, dafka different. That first Aaron HaKohen got dressed with all the Shmonim begadim, including the Avneit. Then Moshe Rabbeinu dressed the sons, which means that until Moshe Rabbeinu, prior to him putting on the Avneit, on the Banav, there was a hefsek with other begadim. Now this is very meaningful. It's pashut. In other words, we know today, Hasidim, proudly, we wear a gartel for davening. Why do we put on a belt before davening? Because one of the ways of preparing to daven, all this comes to Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish. So look in Shulchan Aruch. Part of preparing is pashut going to the bathroom. In other words, it's like sur mirah. If there's something, even only physically, and for sure baruknis, that's not clean, go away from that. That's one type of avodah. So you're separating uncleanliness to be able to connect to God. L'choira, that's also connected, right, to the Perisha L'Reb Yechanan, and l'choira, that's connected to an avneit. What's pshat an avneit? That, where do we put the avneit? We put the avneit on the tarpesh hakovid. We put the avneit, it's very important, not where you put your belt. In the Americana types of clothing that we're going to go away when Mashiach comes probably, you put the gartel on top of the diaphragm. The diaphragm, the gashmis in the body, right, Dr. Baruch, so you have the higher organs, which is the heart and the lungs, and then you have the intestines. So it's like 2 parts of the goof. One is like the earthy part, and one is the elevated. We separate, hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil. It's a separation from holy and unholy. And begashmi is from clean, from pashut unclean. Not all choil is unclean, but that's one type of gartel. But then you have, like we mentioned, in the avodah of a tzaddik itself, like what's the bechira of a tzaddik? What's the avodah of a tzaddik? Is not between good and bad. There's no bad. There's no hargod batainis. Right, the sefer that we don't have from the Alter Rebbe. It's choosing between good and good, between good and better. It's a whole different type of avodah. It means even in the realm of holiness, there is holy and even holier. That's connected to the Perisha of Reish Lakish. Because Moshe Rabbeinu, we got Maimed Har Sinai, that's the greatest Gilui of Alikus, but then Moshe Rabbeinu needed to go to even a greater level. So there's a separation between one level in Kedusha to a higher level of Kedusha. That was the Gartel of the Kohen Gadol. So that's the Pshat, maybe, that it's a whole different type of Gartel. And Adarabah, this will explain, we'll speak this more out when we come to Daf Yud Beis. How can they wear shatnez? There's a reason why God prohibited shatnez. So why by the big day kahuna, Gadol, Kula Alma, there was shatnez? It must be, as we learn in Chasidus, that in the lower levels of the Sfiras, Chesed and Gevura. Chesed, you can't mix Chesed and Gevura. Now there's an inter-inclusion, this Chesed Shebegevura, Gevura Shebechesed, but it's 2 separate Sfiras. You got to keep them separated. When you go on a higher level in Kedusha, so they all come from the same source. They are all included in Keser. They are all included in the Oirin Soiftis Pshitus. That means the greater the level of godliness, the less division, even division of Kedusha. So l'chayda, that's the question regarding the Kohen Stam. What level was he at? Or what level did he aspire to reach? And if he wore shatnez, which is the avneit, it's separating between holy and holy. Because if it would be a person on the lower level where there's holy and potential non-holy, on that level there should still be an isur of shatnez. Dafka the kohen gadol l'kula alma, for sure the whole concept of an avneit is like the avodah that we'll have of a tzaddik, or the avodah of the future, when there won't be any more yetzer hara. There's still going to be an avodah. What will be the avodah? Separation between this or that. What's the this or that? The separation itself is a holy separation. That will be an explanation. A lot more to be continued.